I'd like to take this final opportunity to share some personal feelings regarding my experience with Child Protective Services, their contracted agencies, and shed some light on the injustices I've endured, as well as the corrupt and illegal, ever so common practices used to achieve removal of my son by any and all means. I will very briefly touch on the history of my first CPS case and more in depth the case at hand. While I'm certainly not a lawyer and have zero education in the law, I have done my best to educate myself in matters pertaining to child removal, my rights in dealing with CPS, and believe come the end of this presentation I will have demonstrated constitutional right violations at the hands of CPS and a court-appointed attorney that did not perform to the legal expectations as stated in the MRPC, Michigan Rules of Professional Conduct, such as zealous advocation, performed with less than reasonable diligence, failed to represent requested defense, and stated interests were not held paramount. This case has left me in nothing short of utter disbelief concerning the severity in which CPS uses dishonest and illegal practices to remove a child. I have been even more disheartened by the lack of professional conduct on behalf of their workers and the seemingly forgotten principles once believed in and guided by, such as not only keeping the child or children safe, but keeping the family together and removal being the final option when all others have been exhausted. Too often are families ripped away from each other due to inadequate representation, common ignorance of their constitutional rights, the laws, and are sadly met with a coarse blind eye enabling CPS and their workers to push for removal and or termination with little to no resistance or accountability for their actions. The unrealistic expectations families are held to, in my opinion, can be viewed as ridiculously desperate grounds for opening a case. Much like the basis used to open the case prior, it is not uncommon for a young child to have an accident that results in physical injury. What is becoming increasingly common, unfortunately, is the CPS inquiry afterwards. When a child has an accident, as all children do, it is completely unacceptable for CPS workers with absolutely zero investigation or supporting evidence to enter your home and start making accusations of child abuse. When the malicious statements are proved false, it should not be an invitation to open a case on something lesser, or grounds for placing the family on the central registry, creating lasting negative effects. Even more absurd is how reckless this authority is used and complete disregard in advising of your rights. It wasn't until recently that I learned you have the right to an administrative hearing to defend yourself. From the age of 19 to 27, I was emotionally and financially responsible for 1, then 3, 4, and eventually 5 children. We found ourselves in a position where relocation downstate where we had employment, housing, and support was our best option. Due to our limited finances, it was extremely critical that we acted quickly. Upon informing our worker Sandy of the transpiring events, she advised us it would be in our best interest to develop a safety plan and participate in services prior to moving. Against better judgment, we cooperated with CPS in good faith. The severity of our circumstances failed to be recognized, our limited finances were exhausted, and we became homeless. Lena and Layla were removed due to a mess created in poor judgment and use of authority. The life of the first case was a vicious roller coaster filled with many ups and downs. I don't think it's fair to expect anything less when a family has been stranded with nothing, had their children taken from them, and burdened with a great deal of services, most of which have no real benefit. That ride was by far one of the most unenjoyable in my entire life thus far, and it ended by voluntarily releasing our parental rights. Unexpectedly and unintentionally, Tricia became pregnant, and that became a source of newfound strength, and the thought of having a second chance at being a father was the real motivating factor behind it. In a short 7 months, with no direction other than my own, I was able to obtain a home, dependable employment, successfully using the Suboxone program and actively participating in Great Lakes outpatient services to live a better and more meaningful life of sobriety. October 28, 2017 should have been a day of celebration and happiness with the birth of my son Liam. 6 hours after his birth, we were confronted by CPS worker Emma and informed an emergency petition for removal would be filed. I very sincerely pleaded the change in our circumstances, offered 100% full cooperation with CPS, and volunteered a drug screen, which later came back clean. Despite all efforts of reasoning and with no prior investigation or consideration, the petition was prematurely filed regardless. Consumed with emotions of pain, sorrow, and anger, while in a fragile part of recovery, I left the hospital with the intent to simply get away. With minimal knowledge regarding the difficult road to recovery, it's easily acknowledged that there is no amount of services, no amount of groups or meetings that prepare you for the traumatic events that significantly impact your life. Even with months of documented sobriety, desire to do better, and all the necessary steps, it was not enough to combat the irrational thought process that was a result of the petition. That thought process led very regrettably to a relapse, which lasted from the 28th to the 30th, only to later learn the petition for removal was denied. A thought that never once crossed my mind. Employment consisted of inbound customer service calls Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time, at $10 an hour for superior contact. On the 31st of October, while working from home, I received a knock at the door. Upon answering, I was confronted by two CPS workers, one of which was Emma, who stated that an unannounced home visit must be conducted. I informed the workers that I would have no problem with a home visit, but given that I was on the clock and working, it would have to be done during a break, lunch, or after my scheduled shift. Emma responded by stating that if the visit was not unannounced and performed now, that Liam would not be able to return home. Left with no other option and the obvious need for my son to come, I took the unscheduled time from work to comply. It wasn't later, after looking closer into my rights and dealing with CPS, that I learned my Fourth Amendment constitutional rights had actually been violated via Cassidy v. Tackett. Coercive or intimidating behavior supports a reasonable belief that compliance is compelled. Florida v. Bostick. Consent that is the product of official intimidation or harassment is not consent at all. Citizens do not forfeit their constitutional rights when they are coerced to comply with a request that they would prefer to refuse. A new petition was submitted to the courts, and the second emergency hearing was held on November 1st. A great deal of information was misrepresented in a clear push to secure removal. The report indicated that Liam was detoxing due to illegal drug use on the streets, with no mention of Trisha being a part of the Suboxone program through Dr. Layton. The state of Liam's nursery was falsely depicted with photographic evidence proving contrary, and the report also indicated we did not have all the necessary supplies for Liam when we in fact did. CPS worker Emma belittled and joked at my employment for no reason other than the fact I had the luxury of being able to work from home. The malicious misrepresentation of information strengthens the claim of removal being the only goal of their agency. I took it upon myself to correct the false statements after being advised it would be in my best interest of my constitutional rights not to speak. CPS at best received a slap on the wrist for the statements that were made. Screen results from the 2nd and 3rd of November would eventually come back positive from the relapse described earlier, when Liam was not in my care and having no impact on my ability to parent. Liam returned home on November 2nd after spending the 5 days in the NICU as the standard precautionary procedure. Housing and employment continued to remain stable. Consistent participation and benefit from both Suboxone program and Great Lakes outpatient services. 100% of daily screens were negative, all substances, while Liam was at home in my care. My ability to care for, nurture, and love Liam was praised on a regular basis. Family First worker Randy stated, and I quote, "You guys are so far ahead of the families I typically deal with, I don't know what to do with you." CPS advised that we were doing a great job and to continue on our path, and there was no reason to question the safety of Liam or any noted concerns that would suggest otherwise. Upon CPS receiving the screen results from November 2nd and 3rd, and despite the significant positives in the case, the final petition for removal was held. Shortly before the hearing began, I met with my court-appointed attorney, Patrick Jennings, for the first time. In a moment of critical importance and opportunity to present the substantial defense, it was clear that my lawyer had no knowledge of the case, no understanding of my circumstances as his client, and the statements made on my behalf were weak given the plethora of factors that could have been used in my requested but disregarded defense. For the sake of my family and in such a pivotal moment, it was against my best interest to move forward in my defense when taking no time to educate or reflect on the case when an extension could have been requested on grounds of inadequate time to prepare. This is another prime example of the inadequacies in our broken and unjust system. Liam was removed on the grounds of child abuse, child neglect, imminent risk, and/or danger of harm. Information from the State of Michigan Department of Health and Human Services Child Protective Services Manual is referenced on multiple occasions. When holding child abuse and child neglect to the legal definitions as defined in PSM 711-4, CPS legal requirements and definitions, it is clear neither abuse or neglect were factors in this case, and the relapse while not caring for Liam and prior to court-ordered screens without further evidence does not prove otherwise. PSM 711-5, Department Responsibilities and Operational Directions, contributes historical circumstances and drug house as key factors in identifying threatened harm. The two positive screens does not constitute a drug house, and historical circumstances had little to no relevance, as most all barriers had been eliminated, with the relapse and substance use being debatable. PSM 713-01, CPS Investigation, General Instructions, and Checklist Safety Assessment Overview. The criteria for assessing imminent danger of harm is categorized numbers 1 through 15 with 85 identifiable factors. Category 1 instructs monitoring or direct services by MD-HHS worker. The present factor in Category 1 was alcohol or substance-exposed infant. To my knowledge, the only substance used and the only substance that I condoned for use was Suboxone prescribed by Dr. Layton. Given mine and Trisha's unstable relationship, there was lengths of time that we would go without seeing each other, and I cannot be held responsible for her actions. Category 2 instructs use of family resources, neighbors, or other individuals in the community as safety resources. The two present factors in Category 2 were prior confirmed CPS case, prior removal of any child. Based directly on the Child Protective Services Manual, there were only 3 present factors out of 85 possible, which further demonstrates the lack of a factually supported removal.